Hi everyone, hi YouTube. It's time for some economics discussion, although we'll be getting a little bit more into politics than usual this time. So if you've been following the channel, you know that we've been talking about wealth inequality, and we've been talking about a mechanism in which wealth inequality creates lower living standards for ordinary people. That mechanism being that folks with lots and lots of wealth also have lots and lots of passive income. They can use that passive income to purchase up assets, which increases the prices for ordinary people, making them unaffordable. Whereas 50 years ago, a working class family probably had either a rent or a mortgage that was taking up 30% of their monthly budget. Now it's closer to 50 or 60%, which gives them a lot less room to work with in terms of spending. And because they can't spend, that means that there's no incentive for companies to produce products for them to buy, which is a drain on our economy. If you look at US history, you'll see that up until about 40 years ago, we had a very progressive tax system. In 1975, when Nixon was president, the highest income tax bracket was 70%, which adjusted for inflation was for people who earned more than $1.2 million. And there were many, many steps below that, which gradually increased the rate of taxation. That changed with Ronald Reagan in the 80s, where he started with a tax rate of 50%, and then that got further cut down and cut down and cut down until it was 28%, which is much, much lower than it is today. His predecessor, George H.W. Bush, actually raised the tax rate, but because the brackets had gotten squished down so much, it was an increase on the tax of the rich, but it was also an increase on the tax of the middle class. And so, in order to balance the budget for what George H.W. Bush wanted to do, he needed to raise taxes. But instead of restoring the previous taxation that was more progressive that we had before Reagan, he just raised taxes on everybody. And then we've been sort of moving a little bit up and down since then. We're basically under the same George H.W. Bush tax plan, which is high taxes for, folks in the top 20th percentile. So your lawyers and your doctors pay really high taxes. Your software engineers pay really high taxes. And then working people also are paying pretty high taxes. And then folks at the very, very top are not having their income taxed any more than like a successful doctor or lawyer. So we definitely need this to change. I think it's pretty clear that inequality is going to continue to drive down our living standards generation after generation. And we're going to start to see the United States transform into countries that have poor wealth distribution. Let's start with a very clear goal. What we need to do as Americans is to get the politicians in our government to change our tax code so that it more aggressively addresses inequality. Now, this is a clear goal, it's a simple goal, but it's also a very difficult goal. If I'm being honest, I think it will probably take our entire adult lives to accomplish this goal. However, it is really the only way to ensure that wealth inequality stops getting worse, and the only way to ensure that our children will enjoy at least the same standard of living that we do, if not better. To help us accomplish our goal, I'm going to do a very brief description of the way U.S. government is set up. This will be a refresher for all of you who went through American high school and learned about our government and its branches, just to sort of give a sense of what we're up against. So let's do a really quick recap of the government structure of the United States federal government. So we have three branches of government: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary. Also, I've put the public on this chart because the public is where the power comes from. That's us, and our ability to influence the government comes through our elections. So, for the executive branch, the presidency, we elect a president every 4 years. For the Senate, we elect senators every 6 years. For the House, every 2 years. So, what does this mean for our goal? Well, in order to get a budget passed that includes increases to tax on the rich, we need support in the Senate, support in the House, and support from the President. Which means that this project will take a very long time. And this project needs to be more than popular. It needs to be popular in as many states as possible, preferably all 50 states. That's because the Senate has 2 seats per state. So if a movement is popular with the public, but only popular in a handful of states, or only popular in less than half of the states, it's not going to be able to get past the Senate. And since we need such really broad support, it's important that this is not a partisan movement. This really needs to be a movement among all working class and middle class Americans to protect ourselves from the ultra wealthy. Now, I want to talk a moment about authoritarianism, because authoritarianism is how we lose all of our power. If you'll remember from the diagram, the public influences the government through elections. We have a 4-year cycle for the president, 2-year for House representatives, and 6-year for senators. If those elections are not free and open, then we have no power to influence the government. Billionaires have the ability to bribe politicians, and even if those bribes are out in the open, if the public doesn't have free and open elections, they cannot influence the government. They cannot hold government officials accountable. So I guess my final word on authoritarianism is, even if we had a president that was taxing wealth, right, and even if we had a government that was taxing wealth, if that government went and tried to make elections more difficult to participate in, or stop them from happening altogether, that would be a major sign that the government needs to change. Because just because they're doing what we want now doesn't mean that they'll do what we want forever. And if we do not have elections, if we have a one-party state where one party collapses and doesn't work anymore, and the other party just wins by default, we have no power in the government. So going back to the goal, what do we need? We need a president that is in favor of wealth tax. We need a majority of House representatives that are in favor of a wealth tax. We need 60 senators that are in favor of a wealth tax. It is almost unthinkable in this day and age that all of those people are going to be from one party. We need Republicans in favor of a wealth tax. We need Democrats in favor of a wealth tax. We need independents in favor of a wealth tax. And you might think that that'll never work because the side that I don't agree with will never do anything on wealth inequality. And you might be right, but you might also be wrong. Let's not give up hope. A lot of politicians are sort of sensing the way the wind is blowing, and they're essentially willing to do whatever it takes to stay in power. And you might think that that's cowardly, but it's actually a good thing for the people. The people can get what they want as long as they ask for it loudly enough. If we're going to win this movement, if we're going to reform the tax code back to the way it was before Ronald Reagan, or in some other way that also prevents wealth inequality from growing, we're going to need support from ordinary people. And we can't just say that, oh, well, the ordinary people need to get on board with the political party and ideology that I hold, or that you hold, or that anybody else holds. This needs to be a movement that goes across party lines. We need a lot of support in the government in order to get a wealth tax implemented. And as far as I can tell, it's going to be the only way to ensure that our children and our grandchildren don't live in poverty. In order to accomplish this goal, we're going to have to work with people whom normally we wouldn't see eye to eye with. It's important to recognize that you are able to work with someone that is not your best friend, that doesn't share all of the same beliefs and ideology that you do. Most of us, I'm sure, that work in a professional environment have one or two coworkers, if not more, that don't share the same ideology, but we still manage to work with them, even if we don't want to be really close friends with them. We can do the same thing in politics, and we have to. I want you to remember that the folks who have had their interests represented in government for 40 years now own most of the media that we consume. And so when you see a story on a blog or social media or on a news broadcast, I want you to have in the back of your mind, is this story being delivered in such a way to make it harder for me to cooperate with people who are in the same economic position that I'm in? Does it make it harder to talk to people who are a different skin color or have a different religion than I do? And if the answer is yes, understand that that's not unintentional, that this division to keep us from grouping up is something that the richest people in this country need. They need that division because if we can work together to restore things the way that they were, they're going to have to pay more taxes, which means they can't own everything anymore. Anyway, that's my spiel for this week. That's what we need to do in order to protect the living standards of our children and our grandchildren. As always, thank you very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Do all of the things that let YouTube know that this video is worth watching, and I will see you again next week.